I'll start out our hui me tīmata I te karakia. Ngā mihi o te rā ki te whānau e huihui nei kia tau te rangimārie. Kia whakatapua tātou me ngā mea e whakapono ana tātou. Haumi e hui e tāe ki. And Susan, I'll hand over to you. Kia ora.
Nā koutou, ko G te whānau, ko Susan toko inoa, ka nui te mihi kia koutou. So I'm Susan G and welcome to Designing Supportive Environments. And we're delighted that you can join us today for what's going to be a fascinating session with a chance to hear about some really practical approaches so that we can all work together to help make environments where people living with dementia can thrive. And our first speaker for the morning is going to be Sarah McCooney, the village architect, and she brings with her a wealth of experience as she shares an overview about dementia-enabling design.
Is that my moment to say good morning?
That is your moment, Sarah.
Good morning, kia ora, ko Sarah McCooney aho. I'm dialing in from North Otago today, and you've caught me transitioning between being a full-time employee for Ryman Healthcare as a senior architect and setting up my own private practice, the Village Architect. Right, so today we're going to have a look at what dementia design principles are, a quick look at design guides and assessment tools explained, a couple of good resources to refer to. We're going to look at why the environment's so important to people with dementia, touching on environmental press theory, the brain and the environment, vision loss and hearing loss, and dementia design principles applied. That's the bit you really want to know. A few tools for retrofitting. So we're going to look at tonal contrast, colour and pattern, clear signage and glazed cupboards and open shelving. Before I go any further, I want to stress that this is a whole universe of research, and we're only going to cover a few little bits today that I think might be helpful to everybody. So next. The development of dementia design principles has been informed by a growing body of research focused on understanding the needs and challenges faced by individuals living with dementia. Researchers have conducted studies to identify the most effective design strategies and principles to create environments that are supportive and safe for people with dementia. Some key areas of research that have informed dementia design principles include environmental psychology, wayfinding and navigation, safety and security, person-centered design, sensory design, and participatory design. Next. The World Alzheimer Report 2020 is titled Design, Dignity, Dementia, Dementia-Related Design in the Built Environment. This is a 2-volume resource of immense value. This document has very helpfully compared 10 key books and 20 key articles on dementia design research, and from this developed a framework for turning theory into practice. The framework utilises Fleming's 10 dementia design principles, the most salient one being design in response to the vision for the way of life. Next. So, design guides and assessment tools. I think it's helpful to understand the difference between them. Design guides provide overarching principles and recommendations for creating dementia-friendly environments, whereas environment assessment tools offer a structured approach to evaluating existing environments and identifying areas for improvement. Together, they support the design, assessment, and ongoing improvement of environments that promote the well-being and quality of life of individuals living with dementia. Next. Fleming and Bennett are pretty well known, and you may have stumbled across them already. They are an environmental psychologist, that's Richard Fleming, and Kirsty Bennett's an architect, and they've developed 10 design principles and built them into a comprehensive design guide and assessment tool. So this is one of the resources you can look at. The 10 principles are unobtrusively reduce risks, provide a human scale, allow people to see and be seen, reduce unhelpful stimulation, optimize helpful stimulation, support movement and engagement. Next. Create a familiar place provide a variety of places to be alone and with others in the unit and in the community, or in the home and in the community. And most importantly, the overarching one, design in response to the vision for the way of life. What that means is the environment needs to be congruent with the care practice that's there. So if it's an institutional or commercial multi-residential setting, that might be religious, it might be hotel-like, it might be a green care farm, whatever that philosophy is, it needs to work hand in glove with the built environment. Okay, the other key guide is the brand new Australian guidelines and principles document. And it works on wanting to achieve the same things, but it's expressed it in only 4 principles. And it's also supported by an online assessment tool. So these principles are: enable the person, next, cultivate a home, next, access the outdoors, and connect with community. And great. And I have done a little comparison of them. They both emphasize creating home-like environments with small household models. The national guidelines in Australia incorporate recent learnings around COVID-19, and both stress the importance of personalisation, safety, and connection to nature. I think they're both helpful and have their place, but the national guidelines are probably a little bit more accessible. Next. So why is the environment so important for people with dementia? Next. Lawton's environmental press theory, also called the competence press model or ecological model, was developed by Powell and Nahimov in the 1970s. The theory examines the relationship between older adults and their environment, focusing on how environmental demands, or press, interact with an individual's capabilities or competence. Key aspects of the theory include the balance between environmental press and personal competence determines adaptation and well-being. So your environment has to match your own personal demands and challenges. When the environmental demands are too low relative to capabilities, this can lead to boredom and skill atrophy. Optimal functioning occurs in a comfort zone where operational challenges match but slightly stretch an individual's abilities. This theory has been particularly influential in designing environments for older adults and people with disabilities, helping to create spaces that provide the right level of support without being overly restrictive or challenging. The model helps explain why the same environment can affect different individuals differently based on their varying levels of physical, cognitive, and psychological competence. And if Caroline Bartle was here, she'd explain that to you all beautifully. Next slide, please. So the social model of care. I probably won't go into it because I can sense I'm probably going over time already, but there is a medical model and there's a social model, and they have different relationships with how with the importance of the environment. Next. The brain and the environment. Okay, everyone with dementia has their own unique journey and will experience a unique set of symptoms. Depending on which dementia or dementias they have, they will have a different set of challenges. The idea of dementia enabling environments is that they help bridge these challenges and help people to utilise their strengths. Next. Right, aging eyes. As we all age, our eyes deteriorate. This can be compounded by damage to the occipital lobe. By 60 years, the pupils may decrease to about 1/3 of the size. We have reduced speed of adaptation to change in light level. There'll be increased sensitivity to glare. The eye muscles will become less able to fully rotate the eye, and we can experience reduced peripheral vision or side vision, reduced visual acuity or sharpness, reduced depth perception, and reduced sensitivity to contrasts. Next. And people with dementia can also experience a range of sight conditions that include macular degeneration and visual field loss. Next. Also glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, and cataracts. Next. And if this isn't enough, we all also experience a yellowing of the lens, which reduces the vivid nature of colours, making them washed out. Next, colour blindness. Alzheimer's patients can experience significantly impaired colour and also contrast sensitivity. This gives a visual impairment, which is rather like Triton colour blindness or tritonomaly. This blue colour discrimination impairment has also been reported for other diseases. Next. And some people may experience illusions, misinterpretations, and even hallucinations. Next. So to summarise that, individuals living with dementia may have difficulties in reduced visual acuity, reduction in peripheral visual field, changed colour perception, blurring, decreased contrast sensitivity, decreased depth perception, difficulty readjusting one's spatial orientation, difficulty judging the height of the floor, or inability to find an item even if it's directly in their peripheral field, difficulty positioning oneself on a seat or solving visual illusions, and perceiving glare as water on the floor. Next. Another significant issue for people with dementia is hearing loss and sensitivity to too much sound. Age is the biggest single cause of hearing loss. We begin to lose a small amount as young as 30 or 40. As hearing starts to deteriorate, high frequency sounds such as female or children's voices may become difficult to hear. This can make understanding speech in background noise very difficult. Next. Noise is recognised as a source of stress, causing a physiological reaction in our body. It affects our ability to undertake common tasks, especially those requiring memory and reading. Next. Dementia-enabling environments manage the stimulation levels of the 5 senses to good advantage. Smelling, cooking food stimulates the appetite. Hearing favourite music can increase engagement, and so on. Next. Okay, so getting to the bit that's useful. There's quite a lot of tools that can be applied that can be used to apply dementia design principles. I'm going to just look at the ones that can be applied easily without a huge amount of cost. So they're using tonal contrast, using colour and pattern, using good signage, and using glazed joinery or open shelves. Next. So in order to give you these little hot tips, we need a little bit of understanding about colour theory. The hue is the name of a colour, so that's red or green or blue, which is the top rainbow there. And then saturation is the depth of colour, which is the colours that go from light pink to dark pink if you don't have colour blindness. And tone is how much light reflects off the surface. So that's the third one down, which is where it's grey scale. And light reflectance value, or LRV, is the measure of tonal contrast. So that's the one that's really important to us. People talk about using contrasting colours. What they really should be talking about is using contrasting tone. So if you turned everything into a black and white photo, how different is the greyness? You can use that to advantage or disadvantage. So you can use it to make things easier to see or more difficult to see, depending on the situation. Next. So here's an example of using tonal contrast, and it's for better or for worse. You know, if you have got white food on a white plate on a white tablecloth, locating your evening meal is going to be a lot more difficult than if you've got white food on a red plate on a tablecloth that is perhaps white again. So you've got, again, it could be all black and white. It could be white food on a black plate on a white tablecloth. So it's about how much light reflectance value difference there is. And it's particularly useful in helping people to grab rails, toilet seats, things like that. Next one for me, please. So when you apply it to the built environment, you can apply it to walls, doors, carpets. So is it easy to distinguish where the door is in the wall? Is it easy to distinguish the doorknob on the wall, on the door? Is it easy to distinguish where the flooring terminates and the wall starts? All those things will support people to move, navigate their environments with comfort. Conversely, if you've got an environment that's not been very well designed and it's got a door to a destination that's not appropriate because it's, you know, it could be the boiler room or something, then you need to be painting that door so that it's the same tone as the walls around it, and then it's going to disappear. So next one. So it's really great little tip if you're doing a renovation is to have a look at how your flooring is contrasting. So if you've got some vinyl budding up to some carpet and they're very different tonally, so it's actually not a particularly good example to understand, but if you've got carpet budding up to vinyl, you want them to be the same amount of grayness if you take a black and white photo. And if there's a transition strip between them, that needs to be the same as well. And I've found there's a lot of problems with floor junctions being different tone. And remember, it's not the colour, it's the amount of greyness. So opportunities to fix that should be taken. There is a little tool you can use, but most products will actually, if you ask the supplier, they can give you a light reflectance value. The difference between them needs to be less than 10% in order to make it an imperceptible difference. Next one. So this is a real problem for a lot of people, that they perceive black doormats or dark doormats as holes in the floor. So that might be a barrier to going out to the garden, for example, going out the front door. I guess you could use it as a tool to potentially stop people from going into an unsafe environment. Again, you want to be careful. You're not using restrictive practices, but if it's been poorly designed and you need to modify it somehow, if you've got a person who's particularly responsive to tonal contrast, you can use things like black mats or painting black lines on the floor as a deterrent to unsafe environments. And next, tonal contrast can be really helpful on seating. That photo there with the little pink post-it note on it is to help the person identify the middle of the seat. It needs to, the seat needs to contrast with the floor. So if you've got dark carpet, have a light seat, and vice versa. And some places I've been in, they've even contrasted the arms of the armchair with the seat, so that you can see where the places are to rest your hands as you lower yourself down. Next, right, colour psychology. Colour psychology is quite a popular idea, but it's been quite well researched in dementia, and they have decided that there is no accurate evidence to support it for people with dementia. Of course, everyone with dementia, like everyone without dementia, will have a personal response. They'll associate colours with certain moods and feelings, and it will give them pleasure and displeasure. But there's no kind of universal theories to apply. So they recommend stay away from it. If you're using it as an underlying principle, what you should be looking at is if you're able to individualise, then just make it relevant to that person rather than something that you've got out of a book. Next. One way you can use colour, I think that's worthwhile considering, is to use colour to make a journey. A lot of institutions have, those endless corridors that are indistinguished from each other, and I think it's a nice idea to look at how you might theme corridors so they're differently. So the experience, that very internal experience of walking through a premises, just for your daily routine, you get up from your room, you walk down the corridor, and then you end up in the lounge. Is that all brown? Is that all beige? Is it all, off-white? Or is the corridor blue and the lounge green? And a sense of just mixing it up so that it is more enriched, I suppose, more opportunities for joy and for being able to distinguish between places. If you could go to the next slide. They have looked at what colours people with dementia like, and if we take the psychological part out of it, generally people with dementia seem to prefer paler colours because they're very strong saturation, so the dark red as opposed to the light pink. They can find them distressing, particularly if there's too many of them. It just becomes it's just a sensory overload. So they recommend using a pastel suite, but you can pick out destinations. Like, it might be important to be able to know where the living room is, which is the lounge door in a corridor full of bedroom doors. So that could actually be painted out in a strongly saturated colour. And then that one down the bottom that you see, it's yellow. So you need to use really strongly saturated colours for wayfinding and make sure they're distinct, so that all the toilets might all have, you know, a hot pink door, but you wouldn't use hot pink for anything else, so that association is simplified for people. They don't have to double guess and go, the garden door's hot pink as well. Is the toilet in there or not? Right, next, please. And this is a little quote from my colleague Emily Ong, who lives with dementia in Singapore, and she's also reiterated the desire for pastel colours and for subtle pattern. And next. And this one is a quote from Martin Robertson, who's a colleague of mine as well, on one of my networks, and he has PCA, which is a posterior cortical atrophy, which really affects his vision. And he says that I forget why, but something to do with he feels that he's in a position to be able to communicate what that experience is like, because he has often those symptoms occur later in someone's dementia journey, and he's got it quite early, but he's still very articulate, so he's able to he's able to give good feedback about how colour and pattern work for him, which has been helpful. Next slide. Right, some key recommendations. Use differently designed or different coloured furniture, different colour schemes, or different wallpaper, so that every place is distinguishable from the others. Avoid the use of brightly coloured or high saturation objects if they're not being used as navigational aids. Do use them as navigation aids, but do not repeat those colours for other things, otherwise that may cause confusion. Do create a journey through the building by painting the corridors and rooms different colours, and use less saturated colours for large areas of wall. Next. Wallpaper, something that I get a lot of questions about. Don't use wallpaper that's highly saturated in colour. Don't use repetitive patterns with a high level of contrast. So, for example, a striped wallpaper that was black and white stripes. You can achieve more nuance with if you go for the same LRV. So you might have pale pink and pale yellow stripes, and you will have created something homely, something domestic, but it won't have the contrast which might cause confusion or overstimulation. Don't use hyper-realistic design. Use a painterly one, because you don't want people to be thinking perhaps that's a vase of flowers to smell or a bee to pick off the wallpaper. Don't use densely patterned wallpaper without negative space. And don't use wallpaper that has many colours in it. So stick to a more limited colour range. Next, please. Tips and tricks. This is a good one. So you can use that idea of painting one wall with a slightly darker tone to increase the sense of three-dimensionality of a room. If it's feeling a bit like a small box, if you paint one wall a little bit darker, it might make that wall seem a little bit further away or a little bit closer. You have to just play around with the effect you're trying to achieve. Curtains. Curtains can be difficult to open once they've been drawn and closed if you can't find the edge to grab, if it's a curtain that you use your hands to open and close rather than a mechanism. So if you use a highly contrasting strip of fabric where the curtains join in the middle, it's easy to distinguish which part of the curtain you need to grab if you want to open them. It's called a leading edge. And another way to add some colour and personality and life into your spaces is to use double-sided cushions and duvet covers. So if anyone's having trouble with them, you can just easily turn them over. Next, signage. This is very short, but they recommend that it's a very brief message with only the essential information on it. Use a sentence case. That means capital letters and lowercase letters like you would have in a sentence, because if it's all caps, it's harder to read. Make sure that it's the writing contrasts with the background, and make sure that there is a picture of what it's talking about. So in that case, you've got the word and the picture. And that when you place that on a wall, that it's not got the hand washing instructions next to it, or photos of the grandkids next to it, or both of those, because it becomes more difficult to concentrate, to focus in on the piece of information that's important. So when you place your signage, make sure it's alone and it's in a clear line of sight. Enabling kitchen engagement and independence. Sometimes it can be hard to put the dishes away or get the dishes out or make a cup of tea if you just don't know what cupboard they go in. To save the frustration of opening all of the top cupboards, if you put clear glazing in, it's an immediate visual cue to what's inside. You can do that with drawers as well. And you can do
just a wee warning that we're going to have to be winding up, which is such a shame.
I think we're almost there. Next one, you can do the same thing with cupboards. Have a glazed piece, and then you can have a selection of things behind the glazing that might be appropriate for today. You know, three blouses that are good for the weather, and put the rest behind the one that's closed. My last comments are around refurbishments. I've done a lot of refurbishments, and here's my hot tips. Get the phasing right so that occupancy can continue with minimal interruption. Minimize distress caused by noise and disruption. Put the residents first. That should really be at the top of the list. Keep all the stakeholders engaged all of the time, and make sure that the model of care is aligned with the environmental changes. Introduce training if necessary. Basically, make sure that you're designing for the vision for the way of life. Thank you. Hope it's been helpful.
Hugely helpful, Sarah. That was amazing. And I think whatever environment people are thinking of, there's some great tips to take away. So that's just brilliant. And just to let people know that we'll be sending out email next week that will access so that you can find the links that Sarah referred to, have a look through the information again, and even watch the video again if you would like.
The last slide has got some references and there's some example design guides as well on the very last one, which will come out if you share the slideshow.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Jane Waterhouse from the University of Auckland, and she's going to talk to us about the power of daylight, which is something that she is thoroughly immersed in as a researcher and PhD student. So thank you, Jane.
So thanks again, Susan, for inviting me to speak. And I do really think it's wonderful that we're all gathering here to talk, get excited about dementia-friendly environments. And it was also very wonderful to hear Sarah present, and she is so wonderfully knowledgeable in this area. There is a little bit of overlap between what I'm going to talk about and what Sarah has talked about, because looking at daylighting and stuff like that is very intertwined with the visual environment. And so, like her, I've included some information about things that might be helpful, but also some of the projects that are being carried out as a part of my PhD and other things. So the thing that I wanted to start with is this idea that basically, if we think about the origins of architecture, what we're essentially trying to do is trying to control the environment so that we can optimize it and live the way we want to. And that is no different to dementia-friendly design, where we're essentially trying to create those environments that specifically are enabling also for people living with dementia so that they can keep living the way that they want to. As you would have seen from Sarah's slides, that one of the key things when we're thinking about daylighting, thinking about the visual environment, is thinking about how people living with dementia might process lighting and visual information differently because of the way the brain might process some of the light and visual information, but also there are common eye conditions like cataracts, glaucoma, or just age-related changes to the mechanics of the eye or the brain. So things might look darker, there'll be less contrast, things might look yellower and impacted in other ways. So I'd just like to, reiterate the point that it's really important that we acknowledge that different people will see the world differently because they have different eyes and have different brains. And that is especially true for people living with dementia. So when we're trying to make the environments more suitable for them, that we do have to ask them what is best from their point of view. Okay, so one of the important things to consider is that many people living with dementia will have lower sensitivity to light, so that means they will need more light in areas to see well. Often in guidelines that converts to about double the amount of light of an average adult. Past studies have shown that low lighting conditions are associated with more falls, more potential for visual hallucinations, and less ability to navigate through buildings. But on the other hand, if we're adding more lights, just keep in mind to avoid glare, as Sarah has pointed out, older people and people living with dementia both have more sensitivity to glare, and that's keeping in mind where you're placing your lights, your windows, how that is in their visual field, in your vision, the type of kind of curtains or lampshades that you're using that might make it less, direct and harsh. So that leads to another point to consider is having balanced lighting distribution across the room. So like, what Sarah talked about with the black floor mats, shadows can be also quite confusing. It's a little bit of a balanced thing because you do need shadows in order to have better contrast and depth perception. You can see 3 dimensions and all of that, but if it's so intense, it can be confusing. So one study over here, you can see the figure. In the very shadowed spaces, older people living with dementia did change the way they walk, often walking around them. So keeping in mind very dark spaces might be confusing. They might not be able to see very well. And I've seen that in some of the interviews I've done as well. And then also similarly, very bright spots of light can be confusing. But also thinking about the room and across different rooms, lighting uniformity can be quite important as well. In general, it's easier for us to adapt our vision if the lighting is relatively uniform. So if you think about at nighttime when you suddenly turn on the lights, it takes a while for your eyes to adjust. It's a little bit like that. And that ability to adapt gets more difficult when you're older. So thinking about that to support older people living with dementia is quite important. And so like Sarah has pointed out in more depth than this, but surfaces and lighting kind of work hand in hand because essentially what we see is light bouncing off surfaces. So similar to shadows, busy patterns, black floors can be confusing, can be seen as a change in level. Having contrasted, like Sarah has already talked about, having contrast is important to highlight things and make things more recognizable. The light reflectance values, that's how bright it appears, is more important than the hue. But one thing to think about as well is, like I said, the interaction between light and surfaces. So if you are having, say, like directional lights or something like that to try and illuminate a space, say the kitchen, so that you can, chop your stuff, and you would often need more lights in those kind of tasks. You have highly reflective workbenches. That means you're creating these things called veiling reflections, so basically spots of glare on the surfaces, and that can be make things a bit difficult to work. Yeah. And then another property of light to consider is the color. So I'm not necessarily talking about a blue light, red light, or anything like that, but rather, how much of the wavelengths of color each light has. And so what that is going to, because of the interaction between light and surfaces, what that is going to have an impact on is the appearance of the colors. So it's not just the colors of the surfaces that's important, but also the lights they're using to shine on them. And also, in terms of the wavelengths, because of the lower sensitivity to lighting for older people living with dementia, ensuring that there's adequate exposure to cooler wavelengths in the morning can be good to kind of combat some of the sleep fragmentation and alertness things. Sorry, I just lost my sentence. That can happen with older people living with dementia. But beyond all of the biological things, one of the things that is really important to think about, especially when you're dealing with domestic settings, is that things like comfort, social and aesthetic factors of lighting, or things, privacy, feel of the space, often drive decision making, and also the use of things like blinds and lighting controls more than just pure function. So you can't always prioritize what is easiest in terms of safety and vision. Often people will change their spaces mostly based on their social and aesthetic preferences, unless the space is has a task that is highly demanding, like cooking in kitchens will often lead to people turning on their lights. Of course, at nighttime, you would turn on your lights as well. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that while there are many artificial means to optimize our lighting environments, one very inexpensive and abundant resource we have in New Zealand that meets many of the dementia-friendly lighting criteria is daylight. Daylight is often preferred. It is more comfortable. It gives better color appearance because it has all of the wavelengths. So that means it's also providing the right wavelengths for the time for your biological clocks. It is also bright enough as long as you are not blocking it with things, like your building is designed in such a way that it's letting in the light. And it can have good uniformity if you are not placing furniture, blinds and stuff that are creating huge shadows areas. And there are many ways to alter our lighting environments. So what I have here is kind of a kind of general spectrum of things from small modifications of the interior to retrofits to bigger major changes on the right. Well, many of you probably already do some of the things on the left, especially, turning on the lights, opening and closing curtains, blinds, maybe less commonly changing the interior surfaces, but also you can arrange furniture so that you are controlling how shadows are being created relative to the light source, whether that's windows or a lamp. Obviously, there is limitations to some of these interior methods when it comes to controlling daylight and how that interacts with the environment. So in the middle here, there are various kind of more architectural solutions. So some buildings might have these things called solar tube, which is these very reflective mirror tubes that bring in sunlight. There are skylights, and then there's these things called light shelves, these horizontal shelves that basically bounce light deeper into the space. And then there are external louvers and awnings and stuff that you can control the light coming in. A lot of these decisions are dependent also on the building typology and also to do with like which orientation, east, west, south or north, the window is facing or the building is facing. Many of these would be less feasible for your average homeowner. So what that really do speak to the importance of having good guidelines so that dementia-friendly buildings are built well in the first place, dementia-friendly daylighting, because it is often quite expensive and resource-intensive to retrofit buildings for daylighting. And so I just kind of wanted to point out what does exist in terms of what we can use to guide designing for daylighting. So we do have a range of things, but none of them quite cover what we need in terms of dementia-friendly daylit environments. So we've got the New Zealand Building Code, which is the minimum standard that we have to meet, generally much lower than everything else. We've got things like the sustainable building certification programs like Homestar. They have higher recommendations in terms of daylighting, but a lot of that research that backs that up is to do with office buildings and adult populations. More appropriate are probably the ones on the right side, middle right side, which are the lighting and also design guidelines for older people, people with vision loss, although most of the research is with older people, and then also for people with dementia. But one of the issues is that actually the amount of research which is actually asking older people living with dementia what they think about their lighting experience, which is the type of research you would have in office buildings and stuff like that for other guidelines, is very limited. So that is what I'm trying to address in my PhD, to see if these guidelines actually match what older people living with dementia, our resident experts, experience. And there aren't many studies that look into this sort of thing. So we can't only ask them what their daylighting experience is. What we're also asking them is, are our research methods, the way we're going about this, any good? And we are still recruiting for this project and also for a follow-on project this year. So do contact me if you're interested. And so what we have done so far is we've taken different ways that we can try and talk about daylighting with older people living with dementia, and also different ways that we can measure the space and the lighting in those spaces. For conversations, we focus mostly on using interview methods that has visual prompting. So one of the ways that we're doing this is using this thing called Talking Mat, which is a card sorting activity, which accompanies the conversation and hopefully makes the very technical daylighting topic a little bit more accessible, keeps track of the conversation, and hopefully make it a little bit more fun. We've also developed a prototype kind of photo-taking application so that we can record the lighting in different spaces at different times and have conversations around them. And so essentially what we're trying to do is get the experience and compare that with the measured data. And so once we have the refined research method, we can carry it out on a more larger scale and actually go back and review whether those guidelines I talked about earlier do match up with the experiences of older people living with dementia. Okay, so while we're taking a step back from visual environments and daylighting, there's another project that I just want to add a little bit here, and I'm very excited to share with you about, led by Professor Nari Kurse, who's in this meeting, the director of our Centre for Co-Created Aging. We're a transdisciplinary research centre, and we're all about creating meaningful inquiries with the community that it concerns. And we've been so far diligently growing our community and supported many research projects that are driven by the older people in our communities over the last few years. And from this year, we are looking to develop more accessible and more New Zealand appropriate resources for dementia-friendly design, so that we can make dementia-friendly design as widespread as universal design or sustainable design. And to do this, we need to pull together those who have experience living with dementia, those who are caring for dementia, professionals, building owners, managers, architects, researchers, and support groups. And we've already had the privilege to have some collaborations with Sarah, who you just heard from, and also Caroline from Alzheimer's New Zealand. And what we're seeking at this stage is just to gather a community of interested individuals who might form some sort of advisory group, and we can ask you questions about your experience. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or if you're interested. So that brings me to my last slide. I just have a few points for you to take away, if anything, out of my little spew here. So one of that thing that I wanted to emphasize is that everyone sees the world differently, and dementia can certainly change our perspective. There are things like lighting levels, contrast, glare, shadows, placement of lighting, surfaces that can, affect our well-being and also independence. While there are many little modifications that we can make in the interior, we also need to invest in enduring changes in the way that we're building. And if there's anything that I've said is of particular interest to you, please do reach out and contact me if you just want to have a chat or if you want to be part of our projects or our growing community. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. So in the comments, we have got a couple of people who have mentioned other resources that may be of interest to people. So Alex has mentioned the Life Mark, and Carol has mentioned the virtual reality tool, the Eddie tool. And so we'll include both those when we send out our list of resources. We'll add those, so that those are yet more things that you can explore. So if anybody has any questions, would you like to add them to the chat or put your hand up? We find it a bit hard to see everybody's hands. But just to also say that for both Jane and for Sarah, we've got lots of people saying thank you and how useful those talks have been. So Jane, just while we're waiting to see if anybody would like to type in a question for you or Sarah, I would be interested if you'd like to just give us a little more detail about that idea of the importance of natural daylight in the morning to help set our rhythms and our melatonin.
So there's been a lot of research over the last 20 years that is looking at that, because a lot of older people, but also in particular people with dementia, do have more fragmented sleep. They might have more night restlessness, a lot of sleeping during the day and all of that. And part of that is that, if you have changes in your eye, like say the yellowing of your lens, also less light going through, but also in your brain, less able to kind of process or soak up, that light information. It takes a bit more to make sure that your body clock is getting set in the morning. So that means exposure to, the kind of bluer wavelengths of light. But of course, you don't have to turn on blue light because, say, for example, in daylight, sorry, my camera's doing something funny. In daylight, there is that spectrum and there's a lot of it. There can be some issues if you are in big residential care buildings and you're not getting a lot of it, because usually the very high amounts of daylights that the high lux levels, the lighting levels, is usually right next to the window. So being outside, making sure that there is enough daylight is quite important. Otherwise, you would have to look at more artificial means. So there are a lot of things coming out now in terms of circadian lighting, because in case buildings don't have enough of that blue wavelength. Sorry, my camera is doing something funny. Yeah.
Sending you into outer space there. Thanks so much, because it's such an important point, because often as we get older, we spend less time outdoors and in sunlight. And actually, because of that, the increasing opacity of our eyes, we need more time. So it's such an important point. And we've also got a question coming in, or from Tasha, or a opportunity just to talk about how these kind of things work when you've got a multi-generational household. Do you find that adds a complexity into different needs, or is this something that actually benefits everybody?
To be honest, that's something that we are interested in. I don't, in my own research, I haven't quite got there, but I think in terms of that project that we're doing coming up this year for dementia design, one of the things we are very interested in finding out is how we can think about the relationship between the care partners, the whānau, and also the person living with dementia, how you balance those needs. There are, sometimes issues with when you say, for example, you're applying all this light visual contrast and all that. There is a sense that some of these things could medicalize the home. So in terms of LifeMark, actually, someone mentioned they do advocate for them. It's mostly physical access and support, but they do advocate for solutions that are developed in such a way that is kind of got a domestic feel. It doesn't feel like you're in a care environment and all of that. In terms of lighting, a lot of that would be enabling some level of individualization. But again, you have to, I think the important thing to recognize here is that the daylighting is mostly controlled by the building. So if you build right, it's much easier for you to adjust your curtains and lighting levels in terms of the lighting controls and stuff like that. Oh gosh, sorry.
That's great. And there's a question for both Sarah and Jane together, again, a chance to comment about how urgent do you feel that the need is that we do revise our building standards to take into account these needs that you've been talking about for our aging population and for our people living with dementia?
Well, I'll just kick this off and I'll let Sarah answer the question. I do think that actually, in general, our building code is a performance minimum and shouldn't be taken as the state of the art ever. In terms of even, universal design and physical access to buildings, it's not the same standard as LifeMark, and that's why we have these certification programs. Same with Homestar. If you look at sustainability, if you look at lighting, thermal, all of that, it's much higher standard in those certification programs. So in some ways, it's I think it's a bit of a balance in terms of it's kind of a political question in terms of legislating some of these research recommendations as well. But in terms of older people living with dementia, there is a lot more research that needs to be done, especially in the sensory environment.
Sarah,
I'd agree with that, Jane. I think that that it would be great if universal design was the bare minimum rather than the exception. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I am so delighted that one of the questions that has come in or comments is from Alex, who says that what's really important to him is the general feeling about needing the freedom to roam, which leads on to our next speaker perfectly. So our next speaker is Sharon Crichton, and Sharon is a community occupational therapist and a dementia educator. And Sharon's going to challenge us to think beyond restrictive labels, because as Tolkien has said, not all who wander, and I'm putting that in speech marks, are lost. So Sharon, we're really, really excited to be hearing from you today.
Kia ora, Susan. Can you see me okay at this end?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have some technical problems, so I've got Bevan is going to be clicking through my slides for me. So kia ora, everyone. Thank you. I've been quite, incredible speakers, both Sarah and Jane, so thank you. I guess what stood out for me probably even more was just some of the things when we talk about the challenges in universal design, and as an occupational therapist, it just, affects us deeply, because we go out and assess people in these so-called over 60s units and we think, oh dear, there's so much they could have done to make this more accessible for people. And of course, there isn't funding to fix them once they're built. So, and as I approach that age, I think also that, it's affecting all of us, not just those with dementia. So, as Susan said, today I've been asked to talk to you about wandering in dementia in the context of supportive environments. So I'm taking a slightly different slant. I want to unpack the word wandering. Could I have the next slide? Thanks, Bevan. As we know, the words we use can be really powerful, and I'm going to explore what can be implied or misunderstood when we use the word wandering. And then I'm going to explore perhaps the reasons why a person might walk. And thirdly, I hope to talk about some of the strategies to assist a person with dementia and also to support carers when walking becomes a risk or a problem. As we know, slide 3, thank you. Although the word wandering is often used to describe walking by people with dementia, the term actually suggests that there is no aim to the person's walking, which is not actually the case. There is nearly always a reason why a person with dementia wants to walk. An important point to make is that there's nothing wrong with walking. In fact, it is unreasonable to expect a person should be happy to spend the time just sitting. I certainly am not a sitter. And behaviour is another word I want to unpack from the perspective of a person with dementia. Unfortunately, the word behaviour is often used with negative connotations to describe the actions of a person with dementia. And as you will be aware, a behaviour is often a person with dementia's way of communicating something they cannot understand or put into words. It is a reaction. It is not a wandering behaviour. So I guess to put that into context, I like to think of wandering behaviour as just simply walking. When it becomes a problem, it is often a person with dementia's way of communicating something, maybe an unmet need. It is not just a sign of dementia. So I'll give you a few minutes just to read and answer these statements amongst yourselves. How many of you answered yes? To all of them, I scored 10 out of 10. A person with dementia obviously is no different than you or I. They walk for the same reasons. They also bump into things. The only difference is their brain is not working the same way as ours. Next slide. Some reasons why a person with dementia might walk include the following. Some of these are quite obvious. They're lost, trying to find something. They're looking for something. Perhaps they always check, at that time of the day, check their letterbox or pick the children up from school. Perhaps they're in pain. Perhaps they're lonely. Perhaps they're bored. And maybe they just simply enjoy walking. If we know the person well, or the person can indicate in some way, either verbally or non-verbally, we often can work together and find out what is going on for that person. But obviously that's not always that simple. We don't always know why a person is walking, and that is why all of us have to be detectives. And I know a lot of you will resonate with that. Next slide. So I guess this is where I perhaps look at it a little bit differently. We've had lots of good information about the physical environment, but I'm going to, without repeating a lot of what's been said, focus a little bit more on the human environment. So first of all, what can we do to help? Keeping a journal or a notebook, whatever, if it's in a care setting, it would be within the notes. Some way of identifying if there's any patterns. When do they walk? What happens before they walk? What happens when they start walking? What time of day? What do they say? What are their facial expressions? What are the gestures that indicate they want to walk or need to walk? So, as we know, memory loss can certainly drive the need to walk. How many of us go to find something and can't find it or can't remember why we've gone into the room and then turn around and come back again? So a person with dementia might be on a journey to find something, have a goal in mind, but then they get halfway there and they can't remember why they're doing that, or they perhaps get lost. And then they might search for an item that they have misplaced, or they believe someone has taken it. Some things, and this has been touched on a little bit, I was reminded of it when Sarah Talks showed us that picture of a kitchen with the items being visible. It is useful to place favourite personal items in an obvious place, and perhaps where they can see them, but not in a drawer or cupboard, unless you do have glazed cupboards. Or maybe a large container or basket where you can put things. I do know there is some problems with that because sometimes a person with dementia will then hide them. Simple labels can help, and as Sarah also said, it's better to use sans serif font and sentence case and with a pictorial element if possible. Feeling lost is another reason someone may walk. If they're in unfamiliar surroundings, particularly when they move into a care home, they may walk and they obviously feel quite lost and quite scared. They feel disorientated. And I know with time that can help, but as was mentioned before, familiar items in their, from home in their room certainly helps. Old photographs, old being, I guess, the key word, memories from the past, perhaps not new photos of people or even of themselves because they won't remember that that's them. Familiar is the key word. I just want to share with you a story of a woman whose family thought they were doing the best and they moved her into a beautiful apartment and they thought, oh dear, she needs a new toaster, she needs a new jug. Mum's had these for 50 odd years and they're worn out. So of course, once she moved into an apartment, she had no idea what was the jug and what was the toaster and how to use them. So it was a very expensive exercise for them. Leaving the bathroom door open with a light on may help. And as we said before, a sign and a picture on the door at eye level can also help. Just remember that as we become more stooped and we have a downward gaze, the signage needs to be lower than it would normally be. About 1.2 metres is suggested, but of course that's individual. As also, I'm just repeating, but a focus group contained people with dementia and everyone recognised that toilet sign. It was a small focus group and it was in Scotland, but it was the most common toilet symbol with the shaded flooring, and it was chosen unanimously. But it would be interesting to do that little bit of research in our own country. As was mentioned, themed corridors, tonal contrasts, and also black holes are really important. You know that, as we know, sensor mats can be great, but certainly not grey ones or black ones because they look like a hole and someone will jump over them. Confusion about time, that's probably self-explanatory, but a large clock can help, and there's different types of clocks. I see on my screen here now I've got a black circle, but that did look like an analog clock. I think, don't know where that clock went, but it's no longer there. The key is to have the person involved in the choices that work for them. I know one family member got a clock and thought it was great. It was one of those expensive ones, but it didn't work. So if you can trial, it's safer to do that. And the person will perhaps take some ownership of the clock if they're involved in choosing it. Another thing, an idea one family member had was putting a note beside someone at bedtime saying, it is night time. And that was quite large and it was clear and in the right font it was on the wall actually beside their bed. But once again, involve the person, perhaps put it in their words, ask them what would help them to go to sleep and what would help them to remember that this is their bed. So phrase it in their words. And one example I had of where it perhaps didn't work for someone, if having a night light, they liked their curtains open, which is interesting because it was a garden outside, but then they got lots of reflections and then they got very confused. So having lights on outside can confuse a person. I won't talk about why people with dementia walk at night. That's a topic in itself. But as we know, good hygiene habits, and there's lots of other strategies can be trialled. Next slide, please. Pain and discomfort often is a reason why someone's walking. How often do we walk when we're in pain? Or when we've got something on our mind? My husband paces outside quite often when he's trying to think through something. So it could be because they're unwell. It could be also that they're uncomfortable. Maybe they want to go to the toilet. Maybe they're wearing ill-fitting clothing. Maybe it's the environment. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Poor lighting, bad smells, too noisy. There's multiple reasons. Restlessness and agitation and anxiety. There's a lot of, people do walk around when they're restless, when they're worried, when they've got anxiety. Some people often fidget and tap. That's another thing. They're repetitive movements. And as we know, it's often more noticeable in the end of the day or later in the day when their brains are tired. So it's often really hard to tease out why this is. I often think, imagine if your memory was failing and you couldn't quite work out what was going on, and then you can't use the strategies you used to do or do the activities that you used to do to calm yourself down or help you relax in the past. And so then imagine being in that head. It must be quite frightening. There are a lot of calming strategies. I won't go into a big list, but listening to quiet music, rocking is a really good one. I know rocking chairs in care homes sometimes are seen as a safety issue, but if you can introduce some sort of rocking chair, honestly, if the person is used to doing that at home, it possibly will work as well later on in life. Things like a hand massage can help. The one thing I just want to touch on around anxiety and restlessness and irritation and agitation is speak to the emotion. It's really easy to tell someone to sit down. Now, if I was told to sit down and I was pacing, that would only make me angry. And I just want you to consider that yourself. If I'm worried, I want someone to say, tell me about it, what's wrong? And a person with dementia is no different. Sometimes I think they don't get an opportunity to express their emotions freely because we divert them instead with a cup of tea. And we say, never mind, dear, you'll be fine. And sometimes I think we need to go deeper than that. And it's individual, but you'll know, and it's worth trying. It's worth trying because it may work. So, for example, they might be looking for something. They might be looking for a loved one who has died. So encourage them to talk about it. Show you're listening rather than correcting them. For example, if they are looking for their mother, ask them about their mother. And that may settle a person and it may reduce their need to walk. Next slide, please. So relieving boredom. It could be because they're bored, but I know that they're walking, but I also know that it is really hard to engage someone whose attention span is really short. So once again, they might say they're bored, but there might be a lot of activities to do. So it's a tricky one. But sometimes if they can feel involved, that they've got a sense of purpose, and we all need a sense of purpose, and a person with dementia is obviously no different. So if it can be normal everyday tasks, things that are left out, like setting a table, it can be a routine, but if the things are left out so they can see, or that's what we do, or maybe a visible washing line, or maybe brooms to sweep, folding washing, that's seen quite often, preparing vegetables. It doesn't matter if it's done wrong and you can't use the vegetables, but they're everyday tasks that are normal, and it does it does give a sense of purpose. Obviously, you know, diversional therapists and activity programs do a wonderful job, and that definitely helps. Lack of physical activity. A lot of people that go into care, especially some of the younger ones, they have energy to spare. And it's really hard if they've been fit and active and they were movers, you know, and they just like to be busy. A regular walking group is a must, and I've seen some wonderful walking groups out there that, you know, and the lovely residents so miss it when they don't, you know, the routine doesn't happen. But grounds with suitable paths for walking are essential, and an indoor environment with a circuit route is also desirable for wet weather like we've got now. You may find the person wants to walk at the time of day when they used to be about, like maybe when they walked the dog or when they collected their children or when they went to work. So try, if you can, to support them with a walk at that time of day. Sometimes it's just easy to say, sit down, you no longer have to pick up the children. But I certainly know how I would respond if I was told that. If you can, let the person walk. Say some things like, I like to walk too. Can I walk with you? Why do you like walking? You're used to being a busy person. It must be difficult when the kids have left home. Once again, speak to the emotion rather than telling the person to sit. And I know sometimes family members can be great by taking someone for a walk and accompanying them. Wanting to leave. That's a huge one, and someone I said just popped up, mentioned VR, and I've mentioned that as well, that there's amazing VR technology out there that can take people on journeys. And I know that technology is expensive, but I've certainly seen some great results when people do use it. There's another advancement in technology as well, and that is in terms of technology for safety devices, trackers and things like that. And I really just want to point you to the Safer Walking website, which I will include with the handout or with the information that goes with this overhead. Because Safer Walking website, if you are not aware of it, I certainly Google it, and it's got everything you can imagine in terms of IT support, trackers, GPS, motion detectors, wander track, and it's updated regularly, so it's very useful. I'm not sure if I need to go into much detail about this, but I certainly know, you know, within Canterbury we have ID bracelets that we get through Dementia Canterbury. I'm not sure about other areas. You know, name and phone number in their bag or wallet or something that they take with them. And also, if someone still does use a cell phone, some people may know this, that you can put ICE in case of emergency. So you put that in your phone and it will come up to the top of the address and contacts, and that's the person, you know, if they're found, they can ring that number. There's lots of other ideas. Just next slide, please. These are just some things that I've included. I think I've covered those, and just one last slide. Thank you. And I just will share that last thought with you. But thank you.
Just a fabulous, Sharon. Thank you so much. You know, if you do want a practical approach, occupational therapists are a great person to turn to all the time. So if people do have some questions or comments that they'd like to make, please do pop it in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, we will try to see you.
Susan, can I just add one more thing? I
Yes.
just meant to mention it, and it came into my mind when Sarah was talking. You know, we talked about the lived experience, and the really good book, it's on, I think, the Dementia Foundation website, and that's that one called Talking Sense by Agnes Houston. So if anyone hasn't read that, it's wonderful. And it certainly talks about all those sensory changes and and how she wasn't aware of that. She certainly was aware that her memory was going to be affected, but that's all she thought when she got the diagnosis. So it's written by a UK author with dementia.
Yeah,
Mm.
it is a great resource, and we can put that link in. So Kate's wondering if you are aware of any particular resources that might be particularly relevant for people who are living with a lifelong intellectual disability and have developed a dementia.
Wow. Not off the top of my head, but I'm sure we've got experts that we might be able to look into that, Susan. I'm thinking of Tracy.
Yeah.
She's possibly gone down that avenue, a colleague that works in that field. So we will definitely share her knowledge. Yeah.
We'll research that one and come back to you.
Yes.
Resource
Yes.
list. Lots of thank yous. Yeah, lots and lots of thank yous. And Lynetta also just echoing Carol about the availability of the educational virtual reality as a different use of reality as the other tool. And someone also saying how useful they have found a particular type of VR product called Rendeavor.
Yes, so that is the one I'm familiar with, actually. It's used by a couple of the care homes that have got funding for that. And actually, one of my students on Walking in Other Shoes program has done a little bit of research on that. So I want to help her present that because it's a nice little bit of qualitative findings.
Yeah, and that's one where they can go to different places. Is that right?
And wear the goggles effectively.
Yeah.
And the findings where people became more more talkative. They even use it to find, someone was from the UK and they found their house that was still there in the UK in real time where they grew up. How cool is that?
That is fantastic.
Very cool. Yeah.
And I love the way that you've been echoing the way that familiarity is such a resource to use, the familiarity of things, but also of routines, that we can think of that as being a real strength that we can build into. That I think that's been a real theme that sort of, come through as well. So if we don't have any final questions coming through, I'd just like to give the warmest, most grateful of thank yous to each of our speakers. What an absolutely amazing amount of ideas we've had the chance to hear today. And, we're all going to be going away and having a lot to kind of work through. So just thank you for so much food for thought. And before we close, I'm going to just hand over to Shireen Maloney, who's the CEO of the New Zealand Dementia Foundation, to give you a wee update on our next hui.
Kia ora, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today to hear those wonderful talks. I just want to let you know, you may or may not know that the Auckland University researchers are carrying out an evaluation of the dementia Mati Wareware ecosystem, governance ecosystem. That's who we are, all of us. That's the leadership and advisory group, and the network is what makes up the ecosystem. It's been operating for 2 and a bit years. And your views on how it's working are important. And the team are coming to the next network meeting in June to talk to you about it. And just to remind you that the network has been working very hard over the last couple of years and produced a number of briefing papers and reports The first one was Korero Mai, let's talk. What does the network want to see? How do we want to be communicated with? Advice on commissioning budget 2022 services, and that had a direct impact on the way those services were commissioned. The network also gave advice on the health workforce plan and the aged care funding and service model review. And we also spent 2 meetings working on a briefing paper called Let's Share Together, Let's Plan Together. And we worked in small groups to agree priorities and next steps for dementia care planning in general. And the combined advice from the groups was shared with the leadership group as a briefing paper document. So the sector's voice has been heard, and your views have been passed on to Te Whatu Ora and the government by the leadership and advisory group. And that's a very precious thing, I think, in the sector, that there's a direct line of advice from the sector to decision making in the health system on the implementation of the action plan. That's the purpose of the governing ecosystem, is to advise on the implementation of the action plan. And we've also, as part of our work, have enjoyed these regular education webinars over the last 2 years. So if you have an opinion on the ecosystem that you want to pass on to the evaluation team, come to the meeting on Thursday, the 26th of June. You'll get notice of the meeting closer to the date, and that'll give you more detail on what the meeting will cover.
Ahakoa he nui ngā whakaaro a te mutunga kua whakakotahi tātou. So we've had a very broad discussion at this hui, and it's been interesting for us, and as Shireen has said, it's a really important function of the network to keep up to date and to be thinking about what are the next steps that we need as a leadership group need to be cognizant of to provide good advice to government. So thank you for your participation today. And me kapi tātou I te karakia, kia tau te manaakitanga ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia piki te ora, kia piki te māramatanga. Kia hoki pai atu, kia hoki pai mai tūturu whakamaua, kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tā e ki e. Ka kite.